Hello, I'm Simon Roderick from FramSearch, and to mark International Women's Day, I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Woolley, CEO of Lancashire Syndicates. Emma, how are you keeping at these strange and perhaps very difficult times?
I'm good, thanks, Simon. I'm better now that Boris has come out and said that there's a route to freedom, hopefully. So, as you say, it's been a very up and down year for everyone, I think, and just completely extraordinary. But we certainly won't forget 2020 or the beginning of 21, will we?
No, it's definitely something we've all been through, isn't it, together? And, it's been a whirlwind of emotions, but I think very importantly, we're seeing our clients feeling much more positive moving forwards. And I think the weather's changed, and as you say, that the plan's given everyone a bit more happiness and positivity. Emma, I want to talk to you today about female leadership, and in particular, female leadership in the city. As it stands, you're the CEO of Lancashire Syndicates, but of course we all have to start somewhere. Would you mind telling me about your journey to becoming a CEO?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's quite unusual, the route that I took. So I don't come from an underwriting background or a finance background, which is what you tend to find. I come from a legal and regulatory background. And I've worked at a few different places as well. So I've worked at insurance brokers, I've worked at a large composite insurer, I've worked at a medium-sized managing agency, a big managing agency, and I've done a few different roles as well. So even though my discipline, if you like, was grounded in legal and regulatory, I also sort of hived off into other areas during the course of my career. So actually, it's been a very positive thing for me. I think that breadth of experience as well as depth in certain key areas, it's been really useful to me in my current role.
So McKinsey talk about the broken rung, where women lose ground to men at the first step up to manager. So I think the stat is for every 100 men that are promoted, only 85 women are promoted. Why do you think this is happening?
I mean, I think there's a myriad of reasons. I think it's sort of largely based in society and where we are as a society as well, and the sort of, the different roles of men and women, perhaps the expectation of what women will become and what men will become. So I think there's sort of early conditioning that takes place. And I think our role models as well. I mean, if you're a young female and you're just starting in the working world, you could be forgiven for thinking that if you don't look like everyone who's currently on the board, then where do you fit in, really? So I think it starts there, but I think there's predominantly two factors at play, and I say that because they were certainly factors for me when I was at that point in my career. So I think firstly there's sort of the society and workplace limitations that exist. So as I say, we don't fit the clone template, if you like. So I do think there's some unconscious bias within companies about who their leadership team will be or who their leaders will be, what they look like, what they think like, maybe what background they come from. So I do think there's some unconscious bias there about what females can and can't do and what we bring to the table. I think also there's the caring responsibilities and the motherhood factor. So I think when I saw this report, they said in there that you'd expect that it would be because, well, women are leaving and having children. But then they sort of said, well, actually, it's not that that's happening around that time. And they seem to veer more towards the unconscious bias being the problem. What I would say is my experience of myself and also talking to other young women sort of starting out, even if they're not having children, they're thinking about having children. So I think you've almost got at the back of your mind a limitation there, thinking, well, should I take this job because I'm going to have to go off and have children? And I know there's a lot of fear around that as well. Speaking to people, I know there's a lot of fear that how you'll be looked upon if you go off and have children. So I think even if we're not having children and leaving the workplace at that time, it's certainly at the back of our minds. And I think historically workplaces have been poor with dealing with working parents, actually, not only females, working parents. There's been a distinct lack of recognition that it's not just females that become parents, and I think the newer generations coming through both want to have you know, the opportunity to take part in the upbringing of their children. So I think that's the sort of first predominant factor at play. Then I think secondly, we have internal limitations. And I do think some of that is because of what, you know, I was just talking about. But I think that females, and I'm being very generalistic here, but I do think we tend to be a bit more self-analytical, maybe more self-critical, maybe a bit more doubting about what we can achieve or what we bring to the table. And I think that, you know, we question ourselves more. I think that we perhaps ask ourselves, you know, are we ruthless enough, or are we aggressive enough, or, you know, are we hard enough to do this business? Are we cut out for this role? So I think we almost take ourselves out of the running sometimes mentally. And again, I think that role models play a part in that there's not enough evidence that it can be done. And, you know, going back to my own case, I think early on in my career, I almost discounted that I would ever be a CEO or a managing director, you know, because I thought I'm not aggressive enough, I'm not ruthless enough. And I think as time's gone on, I realised that actually to be compassionate and understanding, and then to have empathy in what is actually a people business, not only do I lead people, but I deal with people every day. That's actually a gift. It's a gift to have that. So I think it's positive, and I think that society is beginning to realise that alternative viewpoints and personality traits are a good thing for problem solving and decision making, because after all, that's what CEO most of the time is about, actually, when you boil it down. So I realised that I don't have to be aggressive or ruthless, and I also realised it's not an either or. So I can still be tough. I still have to make tough decisions sometimes, but I can be kind about how I do that and compassionate about how I do that. And, you know, I can be decisive, but again, I can be understanding, I can be compassionate about how I do that. So actually, I think that makes for a pretty good grounding in terms of dealing with people and being CEO. So, you know, I think that having less clones and more difference is a great thing. And I think, you know, in terms of children, the same. Where I remember early on thinking, oh gosh, when am I going to sort of fit that in? When's the right time to do that? And the truth of the matter is, 10 years ago, when I was going to have, or 11 years ago actually, when I was going to have my first child, I actually missed out on a promotion because I was pregnant when they offered it to me. And not only did I take myself out of the running, but it was almost by mutual consent. You know, did I want to put that strain on myself when I came back? And, you know, I mean, and it was my first child, so I didn't know what I was going to be capable of. I didn't know how that would feel. But I did. I came back and it was absolutely fine. And I did another maternity leave, you know, sort of 4 years later, and that was absolutely fine as well. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, because there's a lot of juggling that goes on with having caring responsibilities, and that role would have taken me on a completely different path, but actually it all worked out. So, you know, and I've had a very rewarding career for the last 25 nearly years, but I also have had a family as well. So yeah, I would say those two factors are the main ones.
And that's very interesting from my perspective, because we've all taken unconscious bias here at training here at Fram, because I do think that these things exist. But I think your point around there's nobody like me, there's no role models on the board, is immensely powerful. 5 years ago, I very rarely got asked by our female candidates about the composition of a board, but I'm asked it quite regularly now. And I think the rationale is, if there's nobody like me on the board, if there's no women on the board, what does that say about my future prospects at that particular company? I think that boards that perhaps don't see that from a retention or an attraction perspective are really, you know, missing out on some very good people. Yeah. But some of the things you talked about there, I mean, are we talking about imposter syndrome? Because I know sometimes it's often levied at women, and it's talked about in the context of female progression. Do you think it exists, and do you think perhaps society and firms can do more to help?
I mean, I think for sure it exists, you know, sort of under the definition of imposter syndrome. I've experienced it. I experienced it particularly early on when I started getting more senior roles, my first board position, you know, certain things that as I stepped up the ladder that I had to do. And I hear it from people as well. So yeah, I absolutely think it exists. I think I tend to frame it as self-doubt, because syndrome sort of suggests wholly bad to me, or something that needs to be fixed. And I don't actually think it is wholly bad. I don't think it's something we need to get rid of particularly. I just think we need to harness the positives of that. And I suppose what I mean is, you know, I continually ask myself, you know, why am I in this role? What's my purpose here? What do I bring to the table? Do I know enough? But I don't let it slide into, am I good enough? Or, you know, I don't deserve to be here. I think that's kind of negative self-sabotaging thoughts. But I think to ask yourself those other questions are actually quite a smart thing to do. Because sometimes as you move up through your career, for me, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, it happens when you're stretching yourself. So when you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, it's about growth. And for me, there's no growth without pain anyway. If you're comfortable and you're in your comfort zone all the time, well, great, you don't get imposter syndrome, but you also are very unlikely to progress. So I think they're smart questions that then you can deal with. And I think personally, the day you get into any role and just say, well, look, this is great, I'm entitled to be here, of course I'm brilliant at doing this role, I think you should probably call it a day, because you're just not gonna, you're not gonna move forward. So I think it's important to note as well, it's a universal thing. So although it sits more with women, and that is definitely the case, I think that's possibly because we talk about it more, name it as such. But I've led men and had teams of men my entire career, actually, and some of them have shared with me that they have self-doubts, or they perhaps, you know, worried about their abilities. It's just less okay for them to talk about it in their minds. So I think where it tips over and we start to get kind of those destructive behaviours or destructive thoughts or self-sabotaging thoughts, and it's causing a problem, then I think it needs addressing. And I think I would share 3 things around that I think helped me early on when I was going through it. So I think the first thing I did was to talk to someone about it. So I sort of talked to, you know, someone I trusted, who I felt I could be open with, and that was sometimes family, it was sometimes friends. I was lucky enough to have a colleague that, you know, we were going through a similar thing at the same time. And I think just to unpack it sometimes, just take it out of your head, kind of unpack it, examine it with someone else. I think even just doing that sometimes can give you perspective on it, and perhaps help you, you know, deal with it a bit more effectively. But also I think that person can give you some feedback. So if it's someone that you trust and you know will be honest with you, they can tell you perhaps where you've skewed it, or you've got it wrong, where you have a distorted view maybe of who you are and what you're achieving. So I think that's a useful thing to do. I think as part of that, it's about gathering evidence. So, you know, what's your evidence for thinking that you're not good enough or you shouldn't be in that role? The chances are you're there because you deserve it, and you've probably worked really hard. And everyone has an element of luck. You know, when I've been really lucky to get given, you know, the opportunities that I've had, but you have to make the most of them when you get there. So I often hear people saying, well, it's just luck that brought me here. It's not just luck, not just luck. Luck plays its part, but it's not just luck. I don't buy that. So I think gathering evidence, your achievements, what you bring to the table, good feedback you've received over the years, you know, just to remind yourself sometimes all your experience, everything that you bring to the table. Then I would say on a practical level, you know, sometimes you have got a skills gap. Sometimes you move out of your comfort zone, you're moving into a role that is stretching you, is stretching your knowledge. Fix it. You know, 9 times out of 10 it's something that you can fix, or at least get more comfortable about. So, you know, finance isn't your thing, take the CFO out to lunch more often, you know, go on a course, read books, just, you know, get yourself in a position where you feel that you have narrowed that skills gap to a point where you feel comfortable with it, and it makes you feel more secure. So I think, you know, on an individual level, I would sort of share that. I think from a firm level, it's the first step is recognizing it. So, you know, it's not always easy to have it at the front of your mind. And, you know, I've been guilty of it. I've been guilty of not recognizing it. And you would think, you know, female CEO, of course she gets it, you know, she'll be on the lookout. It's actually, I'm just as susceptible to anybody else to being kind of, you know, the shiny lights of the really confident person in the room, or, you know, the really capable one, or the one that shouts the loudest or is vouched for by his male colleagues. I've had to really train myself to push past that and notice the females that are quietly doing a fantastic job, perhaps, you know, don't shout about it as much or aren't as visible, but are probably, you know, have great skills and are potential rising stars. So I think where I've seen that happen, I think women tend to want their work to speak for itself. So they do great work and then they step back saying, I will be rewarded for this. And then they're kind of disappointed when it doesn't happen. Because unfortunately, the reality is that is not always the case. So I think that if you're a leader in a firm, you know, you should keep that in mind, really, and support those women, you know, help them with their self-belief and sponsor them, advocate for them. And then I think, you know, from a society perspective, again, it goes back to role models. We need more honest role models as well. I mean, I remember reading kind of stories about, you know, these women, super women stories that had 5 kids and worked 20 hours days and still, you know, looked and felt amazing. And that's just not a realistic role model to aspire to. It's not reality. You know, being a leader is tough. It takes it out of you. It's even more complicated if you have caring responsibilities, the juggling that goes along with that, you know. So you have to kind of cut yourself some slack and realize that, you know, you're not doing better or worse than anyone else. Actually, you're probably just doing the best you can, and the chances are that's good enough. So I think ultimately those role models should be honest, but should represent that it is doable. You know, it definitely can be done, and it can be very rewarding.
It's interesting as well, because I think one of the difficulties of lockdown was that actually, you know, if you look at the stats, caring responsibilities did tend to fall to the woman in the relationship, and actually lockdown hasn't been equal, and it's been particularly hard for females in the workforce and everything else, because we're not quite Scandinavia. But one thing I want to pick up on that you said there, I think self-doubt, or whether it's actually self-awareness, I think is a nicer way to perhaps put it, can be an incredible strength. You know, if you look at the reports that come out from some of the management consultants, you know, female investment managers are incredibly successful, and there are a whole host of reasons why that's the case. But one of the reasons I think that is the case is because they are self-aware, and therefore they manage risk correctly, and they know where they really add value, and in their blind spots they're not perhaps afraid to say, actually, that is a blind spot for me. And that's why they make such good fund managers sometimes. It's a very interesting, you know, area of research, and I think that firms, you know, will look into more and more going forwards. We all know that more diverse boards make for better businesses, not just culturally, but I think also from an economic perspective. The evidence is all there. So how do you feel when you see stats like 1/3 of the FTSE 350 or FTSE 350 boards are female?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. So overall, I think that's a good thing. I think it's a step in the right direction. It shows tangible change from where we were. But I think delving into the report a bit more, you know, you can see that it's mainly dominated by NED roles, so non-exec roles. And also, I think I read that there's 17 female CEOs in the entire FTSE 350. So, I mean, that's shockingly low, really, when you think about it. And I don't believe that's about lack of talent. I really don't. So there must be other factors at play. So I think I wonder sometimes how much of this is about ticking the box. I wonder how much this is driven by the regulators. How real is it? How much have we really broken down those structural and mental barriers? And the pipeline talent, who's coming through and how are we nurturing those people? So I think we've moved on as a society, a fair amount, but I think structurally we're nowhere near yet. When we talked earlier about working parents and the ability for men and women to take an equal part so that women can perhaps put their foot on the gas, I just don't think that we've done enough there as a society generally and within firms. But I do hope, the good thing about it is I think that as you get more women in those roles and on boards, that hopefully they start to influence the culture a little bit more, and we see things change. So I think it's incredibly slow though, but I'm very positive about the momentum that started, and maybe we're starting to break that clone model a little bit and start creating those role models that that we talked about needing. So I think diversity and more diversity is good. I think we're on the right path, but we should definitely be aiming for parity, and that's such a long way off. In a truly meritocratic society, it should be the best person that gets the job. It should be that, whether that's male or female, but they should have had an even playing field to start with, and that's not the case at the moment in my view. So I think particularly, we should about closing the gender pay gap until we get on the right road with that. I mean, there's still a motherhood tax that exists, that if you go off and have children, the chances are you're going to be even more behind in the gender pay disparity. So when we've got 50% leadership, I think I'll sit here and go, it's brilliant, Simon, we've done fantastically. But for now, I don't want to end on a kind of down note. So I do say, great, more of it though, please.
But how do you feel about quotas?
Quotas, I think it's a tricky subject, because actually I'm not against quotas, but I'm not for them. So what I mean by that is, on any given day, I go 80-20 against, 60-40 against, but I'm always kind of more on the not for them side, because I wonder how real they are. I wonder, do they achieve what they're trying to achieve? So, for example, I mean, I totally get the arguments. I get the arguments about having females in CEO roles encourages other women, they can make choices. But unless you have that parity, then really does it make the difference that we need it to? So I think that, in terms of the reasons why I'm not up for it, I think again it plays into that kind of tick box idea. And I mean, if there's a case for bringing on imposter syndrome, surely being the female tick box on the board is it. And I think it starts women off from a negative position, quite frankly, because I think it's hard enough doing a role like that, and you need the support and respect of your peers. And I think that you only get that if they feel that you deserve your place, or that you bring the right experience or skills to the board. And I just think you may well do, but I think the fact that you're part of a quota kind of calls that into question, and really does just put you on the back foot from the start. So then I sort of feel, I mean, personally, I would hate it. I would hate to feel that I was there because I was filling a quota. And I think sometimes you set women up to fail, because you're putting, and I mean, sometimes they're not board ready. Sometimes they haven't been brought through the pipeline that gives you the experience and the hard knocks and the, those things that make you ready to be on a board. You need kind of toughness and resilience, and to have been through it a bit. And I just think if you just get sort of put on there, maybe you're set up to fail, and then maybe everyone says, see, I told you it's not a good idea to have a woman on a board. So I just worry about that a bit. And just so overall, I think it's a no from me. But as I say, I fluctuate because I do see the benefits. I can see sometimes where it does work, and particularly when things are going really slow. When things are slow, sometimes you just need to push it along. But yeah, overall, I'd say no.
So a young woman leaving school or university comes to you for advice and says, you're a CEO, I want to build a career in the city. What advice would you give them? And actually, can I just roll a second question into that as well? What advice would you give to young men in facilitating a better working environment as well?
So firstly, I'd say go for it. I'd say do it. It's been great for me. It's tough, it's hard, it's been, but it's been so rewarding. And to have a career that you love is a fantastic thing. So firstly, I'd say go for it. And then I think there's three sort of main things that I would share. Firstly, I'd say find a job you enjoy. So really, if you have the opportunity to, fish around a bit, see what you like, see what you're good at, see what interests you. Because I do tend to think that if you're in a job that you enjoy, you'll love it. And if you love it, you'll be passionate about it and you'll be better at it. So I think it's a bit of a circle, really, a positive circle. I think people that kind of fall into things and put up with them is not ideal, really, and not really the route to, to a fulfilling career. And also, remember that you don't have to go up the ladder. You can kind of move around a little bit, and do things in a slightly non-linear way. I think secondly, and this sort of sounds a bit, I think, an unusual piece of, sort of information to share, but I think just self-awareness and getting to know yourself, because I think some of the things we've talked about, if you have a steady base within yourself about who you are, what your values are, what you bring to the table, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, I think that it gives you some stability maybe to deal with some of what you do have to deal with, some of the barriers that you face as a female. So I would say that, and it often leads to acceptance as well, I think, because, when we talked about being self-analytical and sometimes a bit self-critical, I think if you get to know yourself, you can kind of learn to be okay with who you are actually. So I've always found it, in what is often an uncertain and turbulent world, because, as we just said, that, the more senior you get, that sometimes the harder it is. It's been a bit of a North Star for me, really. Knowing what I am about, it has been a bit of a North Star. So I think finally, I would say just be brave. Be really brave. I mean, most of the best things that have happened to me in my career, in fact, in my life, have been because I've been brave. I've gone for it. So I think if you find a way, and I think it is a personal thing, this part, find a way to push through whatever your fears are, because really that will really help you to achieve what you want to. And I remind myself, that most of the time the fear is worse than reality. 99% of the time it all works out. And I remind myself also that I have a choice. I have a choice to be fearful. I have a choice to be courageous. So I think just make the choice to be brave about things.
And one word to young men.
So young men, I say, be the kind of man you would want your son to be, and treat women in the same way that you would want your daughter to be treated. And if you haven't got one, imagine what you would expect. You would want them to be compassionate and kind and, respectful. So, I think men have a lot of challenges too, and a lot of pressures too. I accept that. But again, it comes down to a choice. You can either give in to peer pressure, which is essentially fear, or you can choose to, support and advocate and lift others as you climb up the ladder, and make the choice to be brave and different.
Some lovely things to finish with there. So, lift others up, and to the young women or anybody really in their career, find something you love, go for it and be brave. And I could have talked to you for absolutely hours, but thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. Hope you keep well, and I hope that we get to see each other at some point when things unlock.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that
Take
be
care
nice?
now. Have a good day.
Take care. Thanks, Simon.
Bye.